We live on a mind-controlled planet. The mind control program is really of thousands of years long duration. Organized religion, institutional religion going back millennia, whether you're talking about Christianity or Judaism or Islam, they would all be prime examples of social and mind control organizations. Our political structures are extremely corrupt. We have agencies that actually have concrete mind control programs, such as the infamous MK Ultra program developed by the CIA in past decades. The food we eat is laced with chemicals that influence our central nervous system, our mind, and our thoughts. The programming we see on television is very much a mind control program. The very fact that we refer to the shows that we watch as programs should be a tip-off. By sports, by soap operas with their dysfunctional family and marital relations, or lack thereof, should I say, by the news programming that we watch, and so on. We are also programmed through the school system. In fact, when you go away to school, you are taught what to think, what to read. You are told when you may speak. You are told what you may say. And you are actually graded on the content of what you write and what you say. In fact, if you don't go to school in the USA and in many other countries, you and your family are subject to police action. So there is a state-mandated mind control program that is forced on children by law, which we call school, and we are virtually all subject to that. This planet is governed by a self-styled ruling elite, the so-called powers that be, and they have a heavy agenda basically of totalitarian control. They intend to enslave every single human being on this planet from cradle to grave, mind, body, and soul. Now, people often think of the ruling elite as being presidents and prime minister, kings and queens, members of parliaments, whether they would be the European Parliament, the English Parliament, the French Parliament, the United States Congress. And it's true, individuals in these positions do have a fair amount of political and economic clout or power. However, behind them, there is another shadowy power structure that I've heard referred to simply as the organization. And they use these other individuals much as puppets. So a man such as the President of the United States, the President of France, the Queen of England, and so forth would be puppets of this shadowy power structure that holds itself behind the scenes. This so-called organization, this organizational structure that lords it over the rest of the earth, absolutely control financial organizations and elites. They would control the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements in Switzerland. They would control the United States Federal Reserve banks. They would control the Bank of England. They would control the European Central Bank. They would control national parliaments and international parliaments, such as the UN or the European Parliament. They would control royal houses, whether in Europe and Saudi Arabia, Japan, or elsewhere. They would control technology, high-tech technology, and the development of technology. Ultimately, they would determine what technology is available in the public realm for the use of people like me and you. The purpose of economic enslavement is a power trip. The goal is fundamentally one of service to self. This organization is not concerned with the welfare of the broad masses of humanity beyond a certain point. The welfare of the broad masses of humanity is a concern to them only insofar as it advances their own narrow self-interest. So you could say essentially they have a psychopathic and extremely selfish mindset. Empathy, sympathy, compassion, cooperation, sharing, these words do not play a large role in their vocabulary. Well, the economic enslavement is already well underway. Even in the last couple of years, we have seen massive amounts of money shunted or funneled from the working productive classes of humanity into the hands of a very small percentage of individuals on this planet, actually a small fraction of 1%. The concentration of wealth in our time is more extreme than anything we've ever seen at all in the entirety of recorded history. And that concentration of economic resources is accelerating as we speak through the so-called bailout bills or quantitative easing that we've seen carried out by various central banks or national banks in the last year or two. These are some of the means that are being used to divert resources, economic resources, from the broad masses of humanity into the hands of the so-called ruling elite and the powers that be. One of the primary means of controlling the human race is through digital means. Now, digital technology is very much a two-edged sword. It can be used for creative, constructive, benevolent purposes. It can also be used for destructive and very malevolent purposes. In this case, it's possible for the ruling elite to create virtual money, if you will, digital money, with a few keystrokes in their massive supercomputer systems. They create money literally out of thin air, out of nothing. They turn right around and lend that money at interest, and increasingly higher interest, to the broad masses of humanity, and demand that it be repaid with interest. Now, when that happens, they essentially have increased the amount of money they had. And in this way, through digital creation of money out of literally thin air, they extend and deepen the enslavement of humanity. We don't have access to those supercomputers, and in fact, if on your home computer you create money, you are guilty of the crime that they called currency counterfeiting, and you are subject to arrest and imprisonment. So this is very much a game that they, and they alone, may play, and only on the terms that they themselves establish. One of the ways that the powers that be are advancing their control agenda on this planet is through so-called false flag events. Now, the mother of all false flag events were the so-called 9/11 attacks on September 11th, 2001. The whole world saw this scenario played and replayed on television internationally for weeks, if not months, afterwards. This was classical Pavlovian conditioning. Anyone who studied elementary psychology understands the work of the Russian psychologist Dr. Pavlov, who conditioned his dogs to salivate on cue when he tinkled a bell, because he always tinkled a bell when he fed his dogs. After a while, all he had to do was to tinkle the bell, and the dogs would salivate. He didn't need to feed them or even bring food into their presence for them to salivate. These false flag attacks for the global population serve the same purpose. Now, all they have to do in order to evoke a panic attack in the world population, in the global population, is to either threaten another false flag terror attack or to actually carry one out. And it gets everyone into another high dither. It inflames the population again, arouses an intense feeling of fear. There are numerous books, excellent books, that have been written on the 9/11 attacks. Also many excellent websites that have sprung up dealing with the 9/11 attacks. Quite simply, the official story behind the 9/11 attacks cannot be true as told. There are too many anomalies, starting with the fact that the towers themselves fell at nearly free fall speed. There's ample evidence that those were brought down by controlled demolition. There's also a fact that later that same day, that afternoon, there was a third tower at the World Trade Center complex in New York City that collapsed again virtually at free fall speed and which was not hit by a multi-engined jet plane. Then there's also the fact that the 9/11 Commission report covered the collapse of the two Trade Center towers, number 1 and 2, but failed to mention at all the collapse of the third tower. In other words, it endeavored weakly to explain the collapse of the first two towers, but didn't even attempt to explain the collapse of the third tower, which was certainly caught on live television at the time it happened. We have been massively lied to in our time. One of the biggest lies that we have been told, essentially a lie of omission, is that there are numerous secret, very large, very high-tech, deeply buried, very sophisticated underground and undersea bases down in the bedrock beneath the sea floor. This has been going on for minimally decades. These bases are numerous, they are large, they are sophisticated, they are technologically cutting edge, virtually science fiction style facilities. A variety of agencies and organizations are responsible for these facilities, in some cases religious. The infamous secret vaults of the Vatican in downtown Rome come to mind. They are extensive, they are deep, and really they conceal a lot of information that is the patrimony of humanity. We deserve to know the information and data that they contain. Military agencies, certainly American and other military agencies, have created many of these facilities. Other governmental agencies, corporations, large companies have created these, and then there's a good deal of evidence, most of it anecdotal, that indicates that so-called alien and or extraterrestrial factions and groupings have created some of these facilities as well. I have a great deal of documentation from governmental, military, and also from other sources that I discuss in my books and have discussed in my many conference presentations, videos, radio and TV interviews over the last 15 years. It's simply an established fact that this type of construction has been going on for decades now. And then too, there is a lot of anecdotal evidence. Many people have come forward in recent years with stories and relating accounts of their own personal experiences, either being taken into these facilities or in some cases having worked in them. I'd like to talk briefly about the case of Gary McKinnon, the well-known British computer hacker who has been arrested for hacking into the computer systems of the American military-industrial espionage complex. And in those systems, several years ago, he ran across some files that appeared to discuss a secret space fleet run by the United States Navy. And he saw a list of officers' names and ships for this off-world fleet. He was apprehended by the authorities for his activities. The American government is making a strenuous effort to criminally extradite him to the United States and imprison him for as many as 70 years. So that evidence strongly suggests that the United States government is very sensitive about the information that he saw inside of its computer systems. The United States Air Force, starting back in the 1950s and early 1960s and continuing right up into the late 1980s, on no less than 3 occasions formed separate astronaut corps from those of NASA and developed technology, rockets and manned space capsules with the intent of forming its own parallel manned space program each and every time after spending billions of dollars and developing its own rockets and manned space capsules and launch control facilities. The Air Force announced that it was shutting down those programs with some public fanfare. I suspect that this was but a misdirection on the part of the United States military, and in fact, having developed the hardware, having developed rockets, and having developed its own launch control facilities, that it went ahead and carried out its own activities secretly while publicly announcing that it was shutting down its activities. And then there's a third piece of evidence which strongly suggests that the American military industrial espionage complex has developed exotic aerospace technology. Ben Rich, the former director of Lockheed's world-famous Skunk Works in California, on a couple of occasions in public talks alluded to flying saucer-style technology that is held secretly by the military-industrial complex. One of the things that I've encountered repeatedly in my underground basis research is plans for underground mining on both the Moon and Mars by NASA, by other federal agencies of the United States government. I've encountered these documents starting all the way back in the 1960s and running up through the 1980s and into the early 1990s. The fact that I keep running across these documents again and again suggests to me that there may well be mining taking place on the Moon and Mars. Now, mining for what? Well, clearly very valuable minerals, if that's the case. I strongly suspect that there are secret mining programs being carried out by the military agencies and by a secret parallel space program. Well, there's big money in mining, and the rarer and more valuable the minerals, the bigger the money is. And if you are making truly big money, running into the tens or hundreds of billions of dollars, then you certainly want to keep that quiet. And if you also have a secret industrial program and operation that's using those materials, perhaps even off-world, you would have an even greater motive for secrecy. There have been some excellent books done in recent years that conclusively prove that there are essentially extraterrestrials and UFOs, and that the United States government has been massively lying not only to the American people but to the rest of the world about that for decades. Ryan Wood has written a wonderful book about UFO crashes and retrievals, not only by the United States government and its military agencies, but by other organizations around the world. There is no question that so-called UFOs and flying saucers have crashed, and that the United States government has recovered them, has it in its custody, and has been lying about that for the better part of half a century or more. Now, there have also been some excellent books written by UFO historian Richard Dolan, dealing again with this very fact that there are numerous documents that the United States government itself has generated. The CIA, the Air Force, the FBI, and other agencies like that, going back decades, again, that conclusively prove the United States government knows that UFOs are real. It knows that craft are coming to this planet from elsewhere, and has been massively lying about that to the American people and the rest of the world for over half a century. There's no question we are being lied to. The UFO cover-up is cracking as I speak, and in the coming years, starting this year and moving forward through the rest of 2010 into 2011 and 2012, this crack is going to break wide open. We are on the cusp of massive disclosure of the reality of the fact that not only are there UFOs and flying saucers coming here from elsewhere, but there's certainly other inhabited planets in our galaxy. And my evidence suggests that a fair number of those planets have human beings on them. It would appear that there is an omni-humanity, if you will, a pan-galactic human race, and that the human race on planet Earth is only one subspecies of a much broader human presence in the galaxy. So much of our history has been hidden from us. I'm thinking of the excellent book entitled Forbidden Archaeology by Michael Cremo, which reveals unambiguously that mainstream archaeology and anthropology have only told us a small fraction of the true human history on planet Earth. There is a great deal of evidence showing that high civilizations have existed on this planet in the past, going back thousands, even tens of thousands of years or more, and also that anatomically modern humans have been present on planet Earth easily for not just tens or hundreds of thousands of years, but even millions of years. The true archaeological and anthropological record of the human race on this planet has been insidiously hidden from us for a long time. Oh, we are deep into a time of serious cataclysm. The extremely destructive and deadly earthquakes in Sumatra, in the Indian Ocean in 2004, and then the two massive earthquakes we've had this year. Thinking of the one in Haiti, which killed something on the order of 250,000 people and caused tremendous damage, and then the more recent one in Chile, which was just enormously destructive. These are just precursors, if you will, foreshocks of what will be coming. We will see more of that in 2010, 2011, 2012. Everything I have seen tells me, and everything that I've been told, that we have entered into a period, a cataclysmic period in Earth's history. There will be great change, not only in terms of earthquakes, but hydrological changes, changes in the seas, changes in the atmosphere. We've already seen tremendously chaotic weather in recent years, including in this year, all over the world, in the United States and elsewhere. I fully expect that to continue and to increase. I was first alerted to the impending or upcoming earth changes over 30 years ago. I was very quietly told that this would be happening at about this time, and indeed it all is kicking in. I'm not at liberty to say exactly who told me and how and why. Suffice it to say that I was given a heads up a little over 30 years ago, and indeed the cataclysms have begun. Back in the 1940s, in the depths of World War II, in the Third Reich, there was a nonviolent group that arose that was opposed to the war and opposed to the totalitarian regime that the Nazis had imposed on Germany and occupied Europe. And this group was called the White Rose. It was comprised primarily of young university students and their professors. They leafleted against the war and tried to arouse the conscience of the German people. As it happened, their activities were found out. Some of them were imprisoned. Some of them were executed for what they had done and for their beliefs. In our day, we're also faced with the problem of a neo-fascist order that is seeking to impose itself internationally. It is very dangerous to human freedom on planet Earth. We see it in the extreme economic enslavement that is well underway. We see it in the vicious imperial wars that the United States and its allies are imposing on various countries. We see it in the Big Brother social control mechanisms that are being imposed everywhere, globally, through scanning and surveillance of the internet, through tapping of telephones, through censorship of the internet, censorship of newspapers by various regimes around the planet. We see it through many different mediums. If you travel, your baggage is scanned, your person is physically scanned, you may be interrogated, you may be physically searched. I'm greatly alarmed by all of this, and I think anyone should be who's worried about freedom. And then in the economic sphere, our economic activities are increasingly constrained, not only by taxation, which keeps going up and up and up, but also by the degree of government intrusion into our personal economic and business affairs at every level. We are being subjected more and more to an Orwellian and Big Brother type of control. I think we will see a flowering, if you will, or a blossoming of a white rose movement in our time, internationally and nationally, whether it would be in the United States, in Germany, France, Great Britain, in the Middle East, in China, in Australia, in the United States, in Latin America, no matter where. And I think certain things will be true no matter where the white rose movement springs up or blossoms, and that will be a devotion, a strong devotion to nonviolence, to peaceful modes of redressing the problems and the grievances that are facing the human race. This will play out in several different ways. A nonviolent response to militarism, to war, a nonviolent response to the ecological issues facing this earth. I could see the White Rose movement playing a prime role, a leading role in environmental and ecological remediation, whether it would be the planting of trees, reforestation, cleaning the oceans and seas and rivers, or establishing or strengthening a natural agriculture and organic agriculture as opposed to the very environmentally destructive industrial or factory farming that we see now. In terms of the economic order, the White Rose movement would be, I think, more naturally inclined to establish a cooperative economic order, an economic order that's not based on vulture capitalism, if you will, a human-centered economic order as opposed to a capital-centered economic order. It means the end of corrupt Fortune 500 style corporations. It means the end of what Catherine Austin Fitts has called the central bank warfare model of economics. For the White Rose movement to be effective, it's not enough just to do armchair blogging. A lot of people will have to go really out of their comfort zone. There's no other way around this. I suppose that the powers that be would view the White Rose movement with alarm. But you know what? The rose is a beautiful flower, and there's nothing more beautiful than a large bouquet of white roses. I foresee the White Rose movement breaking out, just sprouting up and blossoming, coming to fruition all over this planet. Frankly speaking, the time of the ruling elite is coming to the end. The White Rose movement heralds the dawning of a new day, and if you know where to look, the tide of human affairs is changing, and it's beginning to move in favor of the broad masses of humanity. These cover-ups, whether in the economic sphere or the historical sphere, or cover-ups in terms of other planets, inhabited planets, of free energy, of other dimensions and other realities, this cover-up is ending. The human race, in its heart, is free, and like the White Rose, we have a bright future, and our future is about to come into its own. Far from being the end of everything for the human race, 2010, 2011, 2012, and from that point forward is where things begin to go in our favor. And really, over these next 15 years, and say by the year 2025, an entirely new way of doing things on this planet will arise. The powers that be had their day, they had their chance, and they blew it. They trashed the earth. They've destroyed the ecology. They have unleashed a series of destructive wars for the earth. The White Rose movement, on the other hand, has a different vision of this planet. We envision this planet blossoming, really. We envision the reforestation of the earth. We envision a prosperous human race where, where individual humans flourish, where entire nations come into their own and have a bright, bright future. The members of the White Rose Movement are absolutely dedicated to nonviolence. At the same time, they're fiercely courageous in the service of nonviolence. If we are to put an end to warfare in our time, it can only be through the systematic application of nonviolence. The problem we face is a plague of organized violence on this planet, so-called industrial slaughter, otherwise known as warfare. The only possible antidote is equally organized nonviolence. Violence is the problem. Nonviolence is the answer to our problem. We will only advance as a species and a planet when we get it through our heads and through our hearts that the way out for us, jointly, together, hand in hand, arm in arm, heart in heart, is through nonviolence. We will never advance by any other means. The White Rose Movement does things creatively, whether in the ecological sphere, whether in posing a nonviolent option to warfare, whether acting nonviolently and creatively in the political sphere. The White Rose Movement is active. There's also an important role in this digital era of the internet for creative nonviolent videography, creative nonviolent use of the internet, creative nonviolent use of other communications media such as satellite radio and so forth. What we can say is that the nonviolent work of the White Rose Movement will be carried out creatively in every sense of that word. Let's go up here against the woods. The woods is a backdrop, I think. I like the woods in the background, there's trees. I am here at the National Military Battlefield in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, USA, to call a global White Rose Movement referendum on the question of war and peace on planet Earth. In my right hand, I hold a conch shell. Of course, the conch shell is a symbol of the sea from which all life comes. It is also a symbol of announcement, that I have an announcement to make. In my left hand, I hold a bouquet of white roses. The white rose is emblematic of the White Rose Movement in war-torn Nazi Germany in the 1940s, when a group of young university students and professors came together to form a movement called the White Rose, to leaflet peacefully against the cruelty of the totalitarian Nazi regime. I'm here today in memory of them to reestablish the White Rose Movement and to call others to join with me in the White Rose Movement. I wear necklaces and a headdress bedecked with crystals from all over the world, from Afghanistan, from India, from Tibet, from South Africa, from the Congo, from Morocco, from Egypt, from Peru, from Mexico, from Brazil, from New York, from Delaware, from Texas, and from Arkansas. I also wear a skein of yarn, One Heart yarn. I very much like the song by Bob Marley, One Love, One Heart. We need to weave a new narrative of peace on this planet. Enough war, enough divide and conquer. Accordingly, I am calling the vote. This vote is too important to be left to prime ministers and presidents and kings and queens. They have proven themselves unqualified to bring peace in the world. It is therefore left to us, the so-called ordinary people, the great masses of humanity. The age of armchair blogging on the internet is over. The time for decisive, creative nonviolence has come. The Hopi Indians, centuries ago, spoke in their prophecies of precisely this time, when humanity would come to a fork in the road on this planet, where we must choose as a whole between war and peace. We must choose if we want a planet of harmony and cooperation, or a planet of warfare and destruction, of murder and suffering. We have to choose whether we want a ruined radioactive planet or a vibrant planet full of life and vitality. We stand at a fork in the road. I am here to cast a decisive yes vote in favor of peace, in favor of harmony, in favor of economic cooperation, in favor of healing the environment, healing the ecology, working with the earth instead of working against it and abusing it. That is my vote. I declare my intentions clearly to the entire world. I am asking you to join with me. Having called the referendum, how will you vote? This vote is too important to be left to the UN or to NATO or to the President of the United States or to the Chinese Premier or to the Queen of England. This is our vote. This is our election. I vote yes. How will you vote?